What if I told you the Mona Lisa was destroyed in a fire and the museum covered it up for over a decade? Would you believe me? Well, insanely, it's true. Except it wasn't a single painting. It was over 500,000 analog tape masters from artists like Nirvana, Elton John, Louis Armstrong. And to this day, nobody knows the whole truth. Why? Because there was a cover-up, which was so big, it's actually offensive. And the kicker? It involved King Kong. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, because we're gonna talk about how this CD master tape scandal was exposed, and how a music label used a giant animatronic ape and unforgivable lies to hide the fact that 500,000 analog master tapes went up in flames. This story is bananas. So today we're going to talk about what a master tape is, why it's irreplaceable, and why you should care. And don't worry, I'm going to make it very simple. Then we're going to talk about what happened, the massive cover-up, what was reported when it happened, what wasn't. King Kong's going to make an appearance because he was involved in the obscene, unforgivable cover-up. A master tape is the first generation recording. The OG, not a copy, not a backup. It's literally the moment the music was captured. There's a few type of masters, but we're gonna talk about two today. The multi-track and the final mix master. The multi-track, think about that as the ingredients, and the final mix, think about that as the cake that you ate. So a multi-track can, well, have a bunch of tracks, but we're gonna talk about 24. Imagine that tape had 24 lanes on a highway and each car contained something like a guitar or the lead singer. Maybe the drums, you get the picture. Each track contains something special. Flour, eggs, sugar. Now since you have the raw materials, means you can make different cakes. Think about those 24 tracks as being 24 different colors of paint. You can make the Mona Lisa, or you can make dogs playing poker. One goes in the Louvre, one goes in a blockbuster bathroom. Point is, it depends on who's baking the cake or holding the brush. Some mixes were designed to sound good on a transistor radio or in a 1979 Dodge Aspen RT. But if you have the multi-track masters 25 years later, you get super cool stuff like alternate tracks. People joking around in between takes, Elton John making rhinestone references. But 30 years later, like when your dad saved everything and shoved it in the garage and there's a bunch of stacks, a bunch of old magazines, but oh my. That TV guide with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno on it just sold for $3,000, even though it had black mold on it. It's gonna be all right. The point is that there's a bunch of Gen Xers now with salt and pepper beards. Not salt and pepper, but to be fair, if they put out a box set, I would probably buy that too. Because if you have the original multi-track masters, you can make something like this. You get things like 8 previously unreleased LPs that sounded like they were recorded in a shipping container, a couple of stickers, bootleg tour poster, reprinted backstage pass. You give me that, I'm smashing the pre-order button. The point is, nostalgia sells. In 1990, nobody knew that Nirvana was going to be as big as they were. So if it sounds like Teen Spirit smells and tastes like your dad's garage, because you could taste it when you went in there. It was the black mold. You get to spend $300 on something like this. But only if you have the original multi-track masters. Because the master tapes got all burned up because they were in a building that looked like your dad's garage, only it was a lot bigger and had no fire suppression. And it lived right next door to a giant plastic ape. On June 1st, 2008, a massive fire broke out on Universal Studios backlot. And the headlines talked about the King Kong ride. But it was okay, because Universal said they were going to rebuild it because of the public pandemonium. But here's what they didn't say. That Building 6197, also known as Building 619, was UMG's master vault. And that burned down too, actually worse than King Kong. Inside were master tapes from Decca, Chess, Impulse, Geffen, Interscope. This was basically the American version of the Louvre for music. Estimates range from 118,000 to 175,000 master tapes lost. And we're gonna get to what was on those tapes later. Think about it as the warehouse where the Ark of the Covenant went at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. if that all burned down and all those boxes were filled with analog master tapes instead of aliens and magic trinkets. So how'd it start? Well, they're doing some roofing work up there with blowtorches, and they heated up a bunch of shingles, and the people doing the work waited until the shingles were cooled down. But they weren't. Over 500 firefighters showed up. We're talking a massive fire, multiple engines. And apparently their priority was saving the clock tower from Back to the Future and that big plastic ape. To be fair, there probably wasn't a bunch of music execs from UMG telling them where to go, because they were all in a Jurassic Park tram getting the heck out of there. But they did make sure to bring the important stuff, like their BlackBerry, because they had to hammer out a press release on the ride out of there. But just before they hit send on their BlackBerry, an email came in that says, "Don't say anything to anyone." And they got super excited because not only did they save their BlackBerry Curve from a massive fire, but they got to do what they love doing. It's their favorite thing. Cover up! If you're having some fun, or if you're learning anything, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and maybe share it to a friend who might be interested in this crazy story. The official comments coming out of UMG was that, listen, this was just some video backups. And let's be fair, it wasn't even good stuff. It was knocked up, Miami Vice, Law and Order, and like we said, only backups. President Ron Meyer said, nothing irreplaceable was lost. Also, scripted PR, which is a lot of fun for everybody. But an internal email from UMG spokesman, the email said, we stuck to the script about physical backups and digital copies. So they were actively steering the press coverage, giving them just little hints, little morsels, downplaying the losses and hammering home these were just backups, and we also have digital copies of those backups, which wasn't true. But they also grabbed a few sacrificial lambs. They talked to the guy that ran the vault, who's very important in this story, and we're going to talk about him later. Give me two names, super obscure ones that nobody has heard about and nobody cares about. And then poor Lenny D and Georgie Shaw got offered up as sacrificial lambs. And those names were quoted in the New York Times and the Daily News. More email leaks about more press influencing. We were able to turn John Healy. He wrote an LA Times editorial to kind of change the narrative that UMG should be blamed for negligence and that they should actually get a pat on the back, by reframing the fire as a near miss and a wake-up call for them to do things differently, not as a cultural catastrophe. The resulting article on June 3rd, 2008 assured the public that no irreplaceable master recordings were lost. And because of this, there was no story there, except for the King Kong attraction burning down. And because they were going to rebuild that very quickly, nobody asked any questions for 10 years. And in 2019, the New York Times released The Day the Music Burned by Jody Rosen. And you need to read this in its entirety because I'm only scratching the surface here. Nearly everything that is known about this scandal is because of Jody Rosen. It was based on, well, Universal's leaked emails, leaked documents, blueprints, legal documents, which we're going to get to later because there is some real irony. And from Randy Aronson, who was the senior vault director when this whole thing happened, and who just happened to get let go from UMG in 2016. And after a while, he was okay to talk about it. It's a heartbreaking story. Please go read the whole thing. Randy called it The Day My Planet Burned. And with that, the truth was out, the cover-up was exposed, and people started asking, well, what was lost? Are you ready to get depressed? Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, John Coltrane, Count Basie, Coleman Hawkins, Ella Fitzgerald, Charles Mingus, Dizzy Gillespie. We're just gonna jump down this list for time's sake. B.B. King, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Buddy Guy, Etta James, Bo Diddley, Buddy Holly, we'll come back to him later, Chuck Berry, Patsy Cline, Bing Crosby. We gotta skip a little bit more. Elton John, Steely Dan, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Hole, R.E.M., Beck, The Eagles, Don Henley, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Jimmy Buffett, Aerosmith, The Mamas and the Papas, Joan Baez, Iggy Pop, Sonic Youth, No Doubt, Nine Inch Nails, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Al Green, Barry White, Yoko Ono. I'm kind of fine with that. I left the full list up there if you want to take a look at it. Here's like the heartbreaking thing. Buddy Holly, his entire discography, gone. The Nevermind masters from Nirvana, gone completely. Aretha Franklin's early chess recordings, a lot of the gospel stuff, gone completely. All of Chuck Berry's chess masters. All of Louis Armstrong's chess masters. And most of John Coltrane's stuff. In a shocking turn of events, they also lied about the digital backups. They said that most of the music had been digitized. They talked about their preservation project. But guess what? Only about 12,000 tapes have been digitized, and none of them were from the building that burned down at the Universal backlot. But they did get a few in Pennsylvania, I guess. Now that the truth is out there, heads are gonna roll. Nope, there was no official statement. The artists weren't even notified. They found out about it by reading it in the New York Times. There was a whole bunch of legal stuff that I didn't get into today. Tom Petty was one of the artists leading that charge. And in 2019, after the story was released, UMG's president said, "This is heartbreaking." And Randy Aronson, who was pivotal in telling this story, he was let go in 2016 because of differences in opinions about archiving. You got to go to the article to read his story because it's heartbreaking too. And the executives faced nothing. Nothing happened to the executives. Ironically, the CEO who said this whole thing was heartbreaking was also the CEO in 2008. And he said nothing happened. We lost a couple VHS copies of The Office. And the irony of all ironies is that UMG sued NBC because UMG was leasing the space from NBC. And guess what? That lawsuit settled, which means UMG used the loss of that facility as a reason to sue NBC, and they claimed that they had lost over $100 million because of the fire and all the important stuff that burned up but wasn't important. Surely this tragedy sent shockwaves through the industry and everybody ran around to do things differently. Kind of, I guess. UMG launched Project Phoenix to scramble to find backup copies. The ones they found though, inferior dubs, copies of copies. That, in a shocking twist, weren't really that well preserved. In some cases they shifted storage to Iron Mountain, which is basically a facility in the side of a mountain that looks like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Except they have a few fire extinguishers on the wall, and more than one person. Today, masters are barcoded. What a novel idea to do inventory. And I can't get into it because of time, but apparently stuff just showed up at the Universal lot, and I'm not kidding, with Nirvana written on the side. Digitization? Not really. Super selective, and only for stuff that they know is going to sell and they know that people want to re-release. So a more obscure artist, deeper cuts, not happening, which is crazy. So the biggest music company in the world that gobbled up a bunch of other music labels that were also super famous became the caretaker of America's greatest cultural contribution in history. And they didn't really give a crap. They thought it was old junk in a garage. They stored the historic beginnings of rock and roll next to a theme park with nightly pyrotechnics. And when it all burned down, they flat out lied. Obnoxiously. They waved around backup DVDs of Knocked Up and Miami Vice just to get people off their back. Created a PR campaign, manipulated journalists, and buried the story for over 10 years. And had it not been for one very talented investigative journalist, we wouldn't know. So let me try to frame this up. Imagine if the Mona Lisa burned up and the guy in charge said, "Listen, this is a huge tragedy. We get it. It's okay. Somebody took a picture of it on their cell phone. It's digitized. We can share it out. And also, we have posters at the gift shop, which you can buy.